A history of childbirth. Throughout history, one thing has had more impact on women's lives than almost anything else: giving birth to children. In this three-part series, we will explore various aspects of this paramount and awe-inspiring process and how it has changed across cultures and through time. From how we think about conception and fertility to some rather kooky pregnancy tests, from the day-to-day realities of pregnancy and how pregnant women were seen by their communities, to the changing medical practices surrounding that most amazing and dangerous moment in women's lives: childbirth. Part 1. Conception. Where do babies come from? Today, anyone who paid attention in their life science class can tell you. But before microscopic eggs and sperm were discovered, people had no idea what went on in there, and they came up with some rather interesting theories about how new human life was made. It is thought that it took some time for early hunter-gatherers to make the connection between sex and pregnancy. After all, sex often occurs without a resulting pregnancy, and signs of conception do not appear until months after the act. It is thought that people in the Fertile Crescent finally caught on to the connection between sex and pregnancy when they began domesticating animals around 11,000 years ago. Figuring out that putting male and female animals together resulted in more animals would have been vital for domestication. Ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle believed that all animals could be divided into two groups: bloodless animals, insects, crustaceans, and other invertebrates that generated spontaneously, and blooded animals that required mating to reproduce. He theorized that females supplied the matter in the form of menstrual blood, while the male's seed gave the offspring form, like a seal stamping hot wax or a seed that was planted in fertile ground. Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, argued that both males and females produced seed which had to be commingled to create new life. But as there was no evidence of female seed, this theory was not widely accepted. The major monotheistic religions of the West, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, went with Aristotle's seed planting theory. The ancient Greeks also believed that the womb, called the hysterica, was a separate entity that could move around a woman's body. If it went to her head, she would become hysterical. If a woman wanted to become pregnant, she should insert something sweet into her vagina to attract the womb there. Conversely, if she did not wish to conceive, she should try something smelly like garlic. In the Middle Ages, it was widely believed that a woman, naturally cold, needed a man's heat to conceive. During the Enlightenment, it was theorized that microscopic babies existed inside a woman's womb, and they required male seed to set their growth into motion. Sperm was first observed through a microscope in 1677 by Dutch scientist Antony van Leeuwenhoek. It took another 150 years for the female mammalian egg to be discovered by German scientist Karl Ernst von Baer. The fusion of the egg and sperm of a starfish was observed by German zoologist Oskar Hertwig in 1876, and the mystery of conception was finally solved. Encouraging fertility. With so many off-base theories about how life began, many cultures throughout history saw infertility as a woman's problem, and the role of men in conception was rarely questioned. Women who wanted to conceive tried a lot of interesting techniques to make it happen. Fertility goddesses were prayed to and offered sacrifices in almost every culture throughout the world. Bastet and Isis in ancient Egypt, Chimalma by the Aztecs, Mama Occhio by the Inca, Haumea by native Hawaiians, Banka Mundi by Hindus, Kichijochen in Japan, Brigid by the Celts, Freya by the Norse, Aphaia by the ancient Greeks, the Virgin Mary by Catholics, and the list goes on. Often women who desired to conceive would make special pilgrimages to altars or sacred places to pray and make offerings to these goddesses. Ancient Persian parents would dedicate their daughters to Anahita, goddess of the moon and fertility. The young women would live and worship at her temple and engage in religious prostitution. The girls who accepted the largest number of men were thought to be the most blessed by the goddess and would be highly sought after as wives when their time at the temple was over. Both ancient Babylonians and Chinese put a great deal of faith in astrology. Women would consult astrologists to chart the stars and advise them on the best times of the month and year for conception. The placenta, the organ that supports the life of a growing fetus and is delivered shortly after the baby, was prized by many cultures to promote fertility. Women in Eastern Europe would bite a freshly delivered placenta, and Chinese and Japanese women ate dried placenta. Women in Transylvania who did not want to have any more children would burn their placenta and place the ashes in their husband's drink. Consuming the reproductive organs of various animals has also been a popular fertility aid throughout the world. The ancient Egyptian Ebers papyrus suggests a rather interesting test for determining fertility. The juice of a watermelon is to be mixed with the milk of a mother who has borne a son and fed to the woman in question. If she vomits, she is fertile. If she only has flatulence, she will never bear again. Ancient Roman medical writer Pliny the Elder had two creative suggestions for ensuring conception. A woman could either eat the eye of a hyena with licorice and dill, or pluck 2 hairs from the tail of a female donkey that is being mounted and knot them together during sex. The medieval church exercised a great deal of control over the sex lives of the people. Sex was seen as a sin and a necessary evil to be performed only for procreation. The Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, a pregnancy without the sin of sex, was seen as ideal, but that didn't work for most people. The Church forbids sex during Lent, Advent, Whitsun Week, Easter Week, on feast days and fast days, Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. That meant that there were only 105 days of the year where sex was permitted. Sex was also prohibited during pregnancy, breastfeeding, and menstruation, during daylight, while naked, and while in church. But we're still here, so it's safe to bet that most of these decrees were not strictly followed. Ironically, the men dictating these rules were monks and priests who were supposed to be celibate, so were particularly underqualified to educate others on sex and reproduction. Most of the advice they offered on fertility was to pray to God and the Virgin Mary, or in particularly desperate circumstances, to make a pilgrimage. Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, suffered multiple miscarriages and stillbirths. She made a pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Friedeswide to pray for a healthy son, but her prayers were never answered. Henry VIII's desire for a male heir was well known, and many men of his time shared this desire. Medieval medical book The Trotula recommends that if a woman desired to conceive a man-child, she must take the womb of a hare, dry it, powder it, and drink it in wine. If she desired a maid child, she should do the same, but with the hare's testicles. Marie Antoinette was married to Louis XVI of France for 7 years without bearing any children, and she was blamed and hated for failing to produce a future king. It is believed that Louis's doctors finally determined that he was suffering from phimosis, a condition where the foreskin is too tight and causes painful erections. It is also suspected that the shy young couple didn't understand the mechanics of sex. Once Louis was circumcised and explained the birds and the bees, the couple had 4 children. In the 1700s, London doctor James Graham set up a fertility clinic he called the Temple of Health. There his patients would listen to soft music while Graham, the high priest, would administer mild electrical shocks and his famous ethereal balm. If a couple was really struggling, for 500 guineas, about $700 today, a night could be booked in the celestial bed, where the couple would receive regular volts of electricity while making love. Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, was a patient. Artificial insemination was first tried in animals in the late 18th century and was successfully performed in a human in 1799. The first baby born via in vitro fertilization, or IVF, was Louise Brown in 1978. Her team of doctors was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine. This medical breakthrough gives millions of people struggling with infertility a real chance at conception. Today, about 4 million babies are conceived via IVF in the US alone. Pregnancy tests. In the past, determining pregnancy wasn't as easy as peeing on a stick. Prior to the 20th century, only wealthy women had access to consistent, nutritious food. Women with poor or irregular diets often had irregular menstrual cycles, so a missed period wasn't always a sure sign of pregnancy. A woman might guess that she was with child if she had symptoms such as sore breasts, morning sickness, or a swollen belly. But the only sure way to know was when she began to feel the baby move, called the quickening, which usually happens about 4 months in. Women tried a variety of ways to find out earlier. Ancient Egyptian women would mix their urine into a bag of wheat and barley. If the grain germinated, then the woman was assumed pregnant. If the wheat sprouted, a baby girl would be expected. If the barley, a baby boy. Remarkably, a study in 1963 found that this test actually worked. The urine of a pregnant woman would cause the wheat and barley to sprout 70% of the time, while the urine of non-pregnant women and men did not. The gender predicting aspect was not conclusive. Both the Egyptians and Hippocrates suggested a woman who thought she might be pregnant insert an onion into her vagina overnight. If her breath smelled of onions the next morning, then she was not pregnant. The idea was that if she was not pregnant, her womb would be open and the smell would travel directly to her mouth. If she was pregnant, then her womb would be closed, blocking the scent. Clearly, there was a lack of understanding of female anatomy at work. Many doctors in history were onto something that the wee of a pregnant woman contained special properties. European doctors from the Middle Ages on used urine in a variety of ways to try and determine pregnancy. Everything from observing the color and quality to dropping keys into it to mixing it with wine, smelling it, and even tasting it was attempted. 16th century optometrist Jacques Guillemot thought that pregnancy could be determined through an eye exam. He wrote that a pregnant woman gets deep-set eyes with small pupils, dropping lids, and swollen little veins in the corners of the eye. There is not much truth to this theory, but women do become extremely tired in the first few months of pregnancy. In the 19th century, doctors observed that about 6 to 8 weeks into pregnancy, the cervix, labia, and vagina can take on a dark blue or purplish hue owing to the increased blood flow to the area. This became known as Chadwick's sign after the obstetrician who brought it up at the 1886 meeting of the American Gynecological Society. But the prudish doctors of the Victorian era rarely conducted physical examinations on their female patients, so this logical method of determining pregnancy was not utilized as it could have been. In the 1920s, German scientists Oschein and Zundek determined that there was a specific hormone present in the urine of pregnant women that was linked to ovarian growth. Today we know this hormone as human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. They discovered that if you injected the urine of a pregnant woman into an immature female mouse or rabbit, and then autopsy the poor beast 5 days later, growth in the ovaries indicated a pregnancy. The term "the rabbit died" became slang for pregnancy, though in actuality, all the rabbits died. It was later discovered that urine could also be injected into a female frog, and if the amphibian produced eggs within 24 hours, the woman was pregnant, and the frog would live. The first at-home pregnancy test which detected HCG in a woman's urine was patented in 1969 and became widely available in the 1970s. Though there were concerns about sexual immorality and women being able to cope with test results without a doctor. Today, easy at-home pregnancy tests are cheap to produce and widely available. In the next episode, we'll look at pregnancy through the ages, what expectant mothers were told they mustn't eat, how they dressed, and why some women spent nearly their entire adult lives pregnant. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.